guys, and welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. And of course, I am your co-host, Ray Russell, always along for the ride here. And this week, quite a unique episode of Regional Wrestling as we're going to tackle, well, a couple of well-known stories, or at least one very well-known story, and another one that's been floating around for the past couple decades as well. Now, at the top of the show, Bob's going to break down his relationship with the unpredictable Dick Slater. Bob's going to talk about his time around Dick Slater throughout the 1970s that led to their infamous bar fight, if you want to call it that, of 1979. This week, we're going to break down the truths and the fiction that's been put out there by people that weren't even there to see it. Then from there, Bob's going to go back to that fateful night, February 20th, 1975, to the plane crash that ended the life of the legendary heel, Bobby Shane. Of course, along in that plane ride, several injuries suffered by the likes of the pilot, Buddy Colt, as well as Gary Hart, the manager extraordinaire, and Austin Idol. Well, he was pre-Idol then. But all four men part of that plane crash. And Bob has a very interesting perspective of the story. He wasn't part of the crash itself, but he did show up shortly after the crash to help out at the Bay. Of course, by all accounts, even in Gary Hart's book, Bob Roop's girlfriend, the first to show up on the scene after the plane crash. And spoiler alert, guys, because Bob's version of the story, a little bit different than what you see in Gary Hart's book. So again, as I said, a very unique perspective of that tragedy that took place back in 1975. And we're going to get into all of that and likely more in just a minute. But first, just a reminder that you guys can listen to the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop, as well as sister shows like the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 in the WWF project, as well as the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, currently covering 3 projects over there, including 1985 Memphis, 1986 in the UWF, and 1981 in Georgia Championship Wrestling. And you can also listen to the upcoming brand new podcast coming to the brand, talking about the Pro Wrestling Academy podcast with the professor of Pro Resu himself, Mr. Dan Giannetti. So good to have Dan aboard here on the brand as he takes us back in time and talks about the history of Japanese professional wrestling. Going to be a fun ride there with Dan Giannetti, guys. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And be sure to follow me on social media for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. And you can follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. Over 9,000 followers and counting right now over there on Facebook. And hey, while you're at it, why not subscribe to my YouTube channel, guys? YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, you guys can friend Bob over at Facebook.com/Poor Bob Roop. Bob always looking forward to hearing from new friends. And hey, while I got you here, we would be very grateful, Bob and I, if you guys could take the time, if you're listening on Apple or any of the other podcast apps out there that offer a rating system, if you can go in there and leave us that 5-star rating and maybe leave a sentence or two explaining why you like the show here. Again, if you truly enjoyed this show or any of the shows here on the WrestleCopia brand, please do us a solid. Stop over to your podcast app and leave us that 5-star rating. It really goes a long way in helping build the brand, but also it helps fix some of the issues with some of the haters out there trying to skew the ratings. So again, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star rating with leave a sentence or two, add a little context as to why you like the shows here. As we continue on, now would also be a tremendous time to become a WrestleCopia patron. You can find us over there at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Talking about that $5 all access tier. Get you so many gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for the Regional Wrestling Podcast, the Monday Warfare Podcast, and the Wrestling Memory Grenade show as well. Plus, you'll get early access to many of the podcasts here on WrestleCopia, where you can listen days and many times as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. Then from there, it's remastered versions, the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show, covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all. You also get digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure, and of course, the Patreon-exclusive watch-along series, covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if all of that wasn't enough, there's also random bonus video drops. Never know when I'm going to drop a new video over there. And video casts on the way, as you guys can watch us and the video we're watching at the same time, see our reactions and go back in time and relive great events from the United States to Japan and beyond. It's going to be a fun time there on the WrestleCopia video cast. And you guys get all of that for the low price of just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Just give it a try for a month. I think you'll like the content that we offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come. And now it's time to welcome him back to the program here this week, the man you all came to listen to. Some great stories ahead, so let's get into it. Here he is, Mr. Bob Roop. Bob, welcome back to the Wrestling Stoop.
Well, thank you, Ray. Good to talk to you again. Sitting here and nice and toasty inside. It's Arctic weather again outside. It's supposed to have icy rain tonight. I don't know if the roads are going to be clear for me to go to work tomorrow, but we'll find out. But like I say, it's nice and toasty right here, so I'm in a good mood to talk to you.
Well, I kind of hope you don't go to work tomorrow, because if you have time, maybe we'll squeeze in another episode.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a good time. But I've had quite a week myself last week. We had a couple of snow days. Well, one was a cold weather day. It was like minus 15. The other day it was a snow day. And in between, my kids went back to school for one day, and my two daughters come home within a day and a half's time. They have some sort of a stomach bug, a virus that went through the school. 150 kids and staff missed the following day of school. So it was like a major thing. I'm like, well, if 150 people got something in one day's time, man, it's going to hit the rest of my kids. But luckily, only one of my other kids thus far, knock on wood, crossing my fingers, hoping that's where it ends. My wife, the OCD captain of the world, she's already a hell of a cleaner, but she's really like super cleaned the last week here in the house. So hopefully everything's nice and clean and nobody gets sick here moving forward.
So you didn't have to put the two sick girls in the closet or anything, did you?
No, luckily they share their own room. So it worked out. It worked out well. Yeah, the older one, she got over it a little quicker than the younger one, but they're both doing great now. It's good to see them back up over the weekend, and back to their old eating habits and running around. So yeah, everything's good here. But everybody's not here for me; they're here to hear stories from you, Mr. Bob Roop. And we've got a couple of stories here this week. We talked about at the end of last episode that we're going to touch on. Obviously, in a little bit, guys, we're going to get to that fateful night, February the 20th, 1975, the plane crash from Miami to Tampa. But first, Bob, I also alluded to another story I wanted to get into with you here today on the program. And I told you that it involved Dick Slater. Now, I know you've talked about this before, at least with Barry Rose, if not other places as well. But I wanted to get it here in documentation on the Bob Roop Show, the Wrestling Stoop. And the story is, and this is all I know, and I'll set the stage and then you can take it from there. On Facebook, from time to time, I get a casual, ignorant fan who just randomly out of the blue, because I co-host this show with you, they like to, try to pick a fight. I don't know the best word to use here, but they randomly point out this specific time that they heard a story that you got into a fight with Dick Slater in a bar. I know that much is accurate, that you guys had some issues there. So I'm going to let you tell it your way, but the story goes that you guys got into a fight in a bar at some point in time. I'm guessing somewhere around the end of the 1970s, but I'll let you take it away from here and we'll try to pinpoint the truths.
All I can do is tell it like I remember it. And there were some witnesses. In fact, one of them was holding me that are still alive. But let's go back. Let me delineate my relationship with Dick Slater.
Sure.
When Slater was first breaking in, he was one of the guys, Ron Fuller, ironically. Ron Fuller was another one. I'm trying to think. Mike Graham was also there, although Mike had done that numerous times. I'm trying to, Paul Orndorff. So what I was doing with those guys was I was teaching them how to defend themselves against somebody attacking them. I wasn't teaching them how to, go on the attack themselves, but just how to defend themselves from having somebody take them down. Because that would be a nightmare. I mean, if you can stay on your feet and while somebody's trying to attack you, you can punch them or, bite them, whatever you need to do, stick your finger in their eye or whatever you need to do to get them off you. But if you get taken down, especially in the ring, for example, what if that happens during a match and some guy takes you down and you can't get away and it takes the cops 2 or 3 minutes to get there? you're destroyed in that town as far as having credibility. So anyway, Slater was one of the trainees for that. I don't remember anything about of any moment. I mean, nobody got mad. Nobody was bristled up and wanted to fight or anything. And I mean, I didn't abuse the guys. I would take them down, but I would also, I would show them why I took them and how I took them down and how to defend it. He's gone now. I shouldn't say it, but Billy Robinson had to reverse psychology. His feeling was that you had to suffer if you were going to break in. You had to suffer, and actually, to be fair, so did Hiro Matsuda. Now, I don't remember Matsuda ever slapping anybody, but he did break an ankle or two. We talked about that on an earlier issue about he would do it to find out if guys could defend themselves. But he didn't humiliate people. I had an impression that some of Billy Robinson's stuff was intended for that kind of a reaction. But anyway, with the guys I worked out with, I never did that. I never talked down to them. These guys are going to be my colleagues, I assume. They're breaking in. Mm-hmm. And so, why do I want to alienate them before we ever even start? It just wasn't my MO. And amateur wrestlers, you don't do that anyway. You might, maybe hookers do. And I can see why a hook fighter or a mixed martial artist or someone like that, I can see why they would do that. They see the psychology involved. If you intimidate the other guy by talking down to him, giving the impression you're not afraid of him, that you think he's inferior to you, I see that psychology. But amateur wrestling is completely different from that. You don't ever do any of that trash talking before or after. I've never heard it ever in amateur wrestling, because you go out there, it's not what you say, it's what you do on the mat. That's what talks. And if you get that done, then you don't have to say anything. If you can't get it done, what do you got to say? You don't have anything to say. You couldn't get it done. So anyway, the workouts are fine. There was no reason for anybody to have a beef because of that. Later on with Slater, our paths crossed here and there. I stayed in his apartment one time with his girlfriend. He was gone somewhere for a week or so, and I kept an eye on his girlfriend. I mean, in terms of just making sure if she needed a ride to get some groceries or something. And then, in Knoxville, Bobby Orton came to me while I was booking for Ron Fuller in Knoxville. Bobby Orton came and said that Slater wanted to come in. Well, I knew Slater had evolved. It was a good talent. So I agreed to it. And then he was supposed to start, let's say he was supposed to start a week from Monday. I got a call that he had been in a nightclub, I believe in Atlanta, with Wahoo McDaniel, and Wahoo, for some reason, pulled out a pistol and was flashing it around, and in the process, it went off and shot Slater through the knee. So he's got a bullet wound in his upper knee, or it wasn't through the knee itself, like into the joint, or he would have been crippled for, he'd been out for a long time. But right. He had a gunshot wound in his leg. So obviously he's not going to be starting a week from now. So I sent somebody, I don't remember who it was, I sent somebody to Atlanta to get him, put him in a car and drive him back to Knoxville. He didn't have any place to stay. He stayed on my couch. He was on my couch in my living room. My girlfriend, we hadn't married yet, Molly, took care of him. When he couldn't get up, or she would bring him food out where he was sitting, and so took care of him for a couple of weeks. During that time, he wasn't making any money. He asked me for a loan. He needed to pay the rent on his girlfriend's apartment in Tampa, so I loaned him $1,500. I also negotiated with Ron Fuller before he ever got there. I told Fuller I wanted to offer him $800 a week, and Fuller agreed to that. But when Slater got hurt, the day that he got there was the day he was supposed to start, but he couldn't start because he was, he had the bullet wound.
Right.
So I asked Fuller to start paying him on that date, and he didn't want to do it. And he's not working, Bob. I said, I know, but if you pay him, he'll be ready in a couple of weeks. If you pay him, you're going to have a guy that'll be loyal to you by you doing the right thing. I kind of forced Fuller to do it. I made it clear that, I couldn't say you better do it or I'll quit or anything like that, but we were drawing a lot of money. Business was good. And Fuller he couldn't say, well, Bob, business is bad. I don't have it. No, he couldn't say any of that because, I think the night before in Knoxville had been like $28,000 or something like that. So he couldn't use poverty as an excuse. And so he went ahead and did it. So Slater came in there and was laying on the couch in my living room, and it was a fold-out bed type couch, and waited on by my girlfriend. And I wasn't there for some reason. I can't remember where I think might have gone to Japan. And then he was also getting $800 a week. Okay, then he starts working. Everything's going good. Then we do the opposition. And before we actually had actually walked out, Slater and I went to Tampa. And I had set up a meeting with a union rep down there for the Siemens International Union, SIU, which is my college, Southern Illinois University. That was my college letter. So I thought that SIU, the Siemens International Union, was kind of cool, to have that kind of connection. But so I talked to a rep from the union, and Slater was there at the meeting. Oh, he was nervous too. I could tell. We were in Tampa. We were
Sure.
5 miles. We were 5 miles from the wrestling office. I don't know what he was expecting, Eddie Graham to walk in or something. But he was nervous as hell about being, maybe caught, talking to a union. Oh, my God, you'd be blackballed for life. Just such a cowardly attitude. All the guys had it. It wasn't just Slater. Well, anyway, the union guy was very accommodating. He said, yeah. He said, Knoxville has got a river, the Tennessee, whatever, I can't think of the name of it, goes right through, in fact, it runs pretty close to the football stadium and the arena. He said, yeah, you guys are in a union. He said, we could have a strike of people who, are working in the buildings, in the wrestling, where you have the wrestling. We could have a strike because it's located near water. We can have a lot of different people that affect your business could go on strike to support you in an action against your employer, against Ron Fuller. So, that was looking good. Well, immediately after we leave the meeting, apparently, now I've never heard this, but it had to happen this way. Apparently, I went my way. Slater went over to the wrestling office, the Snake Pit over there on Albany Street, and told Eddie Graham what we were doing. Because when I got back to Knoxville the next day, Ron Fuller called me to his house, and he knew what I was doing. He said, yeah, I hear you guys are going opposition to me, he didn't say you. He says, I hear you're leading an opposition to me. And of course, now I hate this part of it, but I denied it because I was trying to protect the other guys. At least I could get out. And also, if I denied it and I just got out of there and there was no proof, then maybe it wouldn't hurt me too bad. I kind of believe that blackball stuff a little bit myself.
Sure.
So, yeah,
well, for good reason. I don't know that you're completely blackballed, but, there's certainly going to be issues moving forward.
Well, I could have gone to Bill Watts, the next day sure. and said, well, there was a mix-up down here.
In hindsight, yeah.
And Bill could, yeah, true, and exactly, in hindsight. But anyway, so I gave my notice, but with my cohorts in this so-called crime, Ronnie Garvin and Malenko and Bobby Orton and I can't remember a couple other guys.
Malenko, Ron Wright.
Ron Wright, yeah, Ron and Don, and enough talent to be able to put on a card. We decided to go off anyway, which was a mistake, but we did it anyway. I worked 2 more weeks, and we made plans, and this we didn't tell anybody, that we were going to walk out after the Knoxville show, and Ronnie and Malenko were the main event. Fuller didn't come down on those guys. Now, back to Slater. The $1,500 I loaned him. I knew that if I just left without collecting that money, that I would never get it.
Sure.
And I had no idea if I was going to be out of the wrestling business. If I was, I wouldn't have any kind of any way to put any pressure on him at all, except personally threatening him or whatever. So the week before, the week at Knoxville, the week before, and the reason I did it at Knoxville was because we got paid at Knoxville, and you could get paid in cash. So I got Slater, he owed me $1,500. I asked him to pay me the week before we left. Asked him to pay me the full amount. He said, "Oh man, I can't do that." Blah blah blah. Oh, I left something out. What's Slater doing? This is hysterical. Slater is the new booker, and Slater's walking through the locker room, and he's actually got a book in his hand. I never saw a booker ever. I mean, he might have the book in his office or whatever, but you got your bookings in your head. And Slater's walking through with a book because he wanted to show everybody, hey, I'm the booker. I'm surprised you didn't get a great big one, like 3 or 4 feet long. And but, I mean, he's walking through with a book, which again was hilarious. But of course, now at the time, 40-some years have gone by. At the time, oh, this guy, I despised him. You know, we had a chance to get a union. Here's a guy that comes in there and squashes it, and just the worst kind of stooge possible to go and sell out his allies. If he'd have come to me and said, look, I don't want to have any part of it and all that, that'd be one thing. So anyway, I got, I think, 750, or I got half of it the week before. So now it's the last night, the week later, and we're leaving the next day. Nobody knows this stuff to us. Fullerhead doesn't have a clue, and Slater doesn't have a clue. But Ronnie Garvin, Malenko, Bob Orton Jr., myself, Ron Wright. Now the Wrights weren't figured out and real heavily, but they would have meant something, and they did mean something on cards that we had after that, on our own cards, our opposition cards. Their names meant something because they'd been rustling around there, scuffling hillbillies and all that for years. So the last night, I went to Slater again, and he kept telling me, "No, I can't afford it. I can't do it." And so I waylaid him in a room. All the boys, like if there's like 20 guys there, they're all in one big room. Most of them are there. There might have been some guys in the ring wrestling, but most of the guys were there. So I told Slater, I stopped him when he was walking through, and I said, "Look, when you were down, when you were hurt, you laid on my couch and all that, I got you $800 a week. You got paid the first 2 weeks. You never even worked, and you got $800 a week. Right. Plus, I loaned you $1,500. Now I'm leaving." They knew I was leaving. My notice was up that night. So I'm leaving to go off and, who knows if I can even get a job. And you still owe me $750. And you say you can't pay me? I said, what do I need to do? Do I need to get down on my knees and beg you for the money? And I embarrassed him to the point where he had to, the boys are all watching this. I mean, there's not a buzz going there. Nobody's talking. No, but they're all watching this. And believe me, I wasn't menacing at all. Slater bowed to the pressure, and he went and got the money. Now, if he hadn't, I'm not sure what I would have done. But I'm telling you, he probably would have had at least 1 or 2 broken bones. Because, like I say, what I've been talking about for the last 10 minutes, this guy has some serious heat with me. Well, I've been talking for about 10 minutes, Ray. You want to give our audience a chance to breathe and ask something, or you want me to continue?
Well, I'm trying to think. Let's see. I mean, you've covered pretty much, you covered your background with Dick Slater. You knew him for quite a while at this point. He broke in the Florida territory. You were there at the time. You've known Dickie for years now, off and on. You bring him up to Knoxville, you get him paid. And, I've heard the story about Wahoo and the gun and what they told the police or whatever the case was there to get, to get him out of that, to get Wahoo out of that situation. But so he comes up, he rehabs on your couch. I've heard that also. You're leaving town. We know why. Well, you're not really leaving town, but you're leaving the Fuller promotion. We all know why. We'll get into that in a later date anyway, much deeper. But so Slater's the one that blows the whistle. That's also been, told time and time again by multiple sources. So that's not debatable either. That brings us to here. And he owed you this money, which I'd heard. I didn't know how much it was. But I guess the only question up until this point that I have is he still owed you, let's just say $750. He gave it to you incomplete there? He paid it completely off?
Yes, he gave me the $750 the second night. Now, all this was preface. So for any listeners out there, I mean, there might have been people that weren't born at that time yet that are listening to this. So I want to know the background of what my motive was in my future dealings with Dick Slater. And so, we went opposition, and we're involved over a period of month or a few months, we were running a show in Knoxville at the fairgrounds or something like that. There was some kind of park or something we were at, and of course Fuller kept running at the stadium. I had gone over to the stadium a couple of times during their shows. They wouldn't let me in the back. I bought a ticket, and I went in. When I bought a ticket, they had to let me in. And I sat, the closest I could get was like maybe 10, 12 rows back. And I just sat there and watched the matches. But I didn't have any plans at all about running in the ring. I just made them nervous, and I was trying to embarrass them because, the fans there had an idea what was going on. Well, at the same time, we're advertised in a newspaper, Knoxville Times, I think it was called. And our wrestling ad got to the point where for 2 or 3 shows in a row, we booked Dick Slater against myself in a loser leave town match. And if the person who didn't show up was a chicken, and we had a big picture of a chicken on there and all that. Well, we put that ran in the paper. It was in the ad was in the paper every day for several weeks. And
Wow.
and so imagine how Slater was feeling. He's supposed to be this big tough guy, and he did beat up some people, but most of the time they started the fight by sucker punching them from behind or throwing something in their face and then sucker punching them. We'll get to that in a second. But what had happened? There was a motel bar there. What was the name of it? The Lounge. Anyway, a bar that was a hangout for the wrestlers. I mean, heels and baby faces. After the matches would go in there.
Oh, wow.
After Knoxville, they would both be in there. Now they didn't sit together, of course. You would have the room between you, but the fans didn't seem to be bothered by it. And well, we had quit going there. I mean, our opposition group, we had quit going there, and that bothered me because it looked like we were intimidated by those guys. So
Right. I
I decided to go down there by myself. And because if I took Ronnie and Bobby and all that, I didn't want to get into some kind of a free for all where we tore up the place, and that would hurt us worse than them. So I decided to go in there by myself. I had to have a pair of cowboy boots. I don't even remember where I got them. I also had a blackjack that was about 12 to 14 inches long that was actually given to me, or maybe sold to me, by the chief of police in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, who had been our head of security down there, and he and I got to know each other and became kind of at least good acquaintances. So he gave it to me just for that reason. He said, you might need it sometimes, so he suggested it. So I put the strap, there's a black leather, hard leather covering some kind of metal rod that kind of fits inside, and I put it in my boot. So I went down to the bar by myself, and all the guys there. Tommy Rich, we were just talking about. Tommy was there that night, and I'm keeping an eye on Slater, but somehow I lost track of him for a second. He had come up behind me, and he said something about. He said, "Well, Roop, why don't you call me a coward now?" And I said, I managed to keep my poise. I said, "Well, I don't have to call you a coward. I think anybody that knows you knows that you are one."
Wow.
And so he tried to throw a drink in my face. He had a 4-inch glass, a big round one that was full of whiskey, vodka or something, liquor. He tried to throw it in my face, and I sidestepped. And before I could do anything, I saw a couple of guys grab me. Now I was very, very, very lucky, or we probably wouldn't be here talking today. I'd be in prison for having Slater would have left this earthly coil long before he eventually did. But I was talking to a guy in the bar. I think he was security there, nice guy. And we'd known each other for most of the time since I've been there. Uh-huh. He happened to have one of those 2-foot long flashlights. I think he used it as if he needed like his sap. Well, when Slater threw the booze and I got grabbed, Slater stepped forward to sucker punch me. And when he did, the guy whacked him. I don't know if he hit him in the head. I don't think he did because he didn't have any blood, but he whacked him with that flashlight. And as soon as that happened, Slater said, "Oh my God, he's not alone." And he took off. So these guys pushed me out of the bar, and one of them And this is a guy who's still alive named Hoot Gibson. Hoot was, I mean, he's hanging onto my right arm. Why?
Let me stop you just real quick, Bob.
Okay.
I'm only doing this because it could confuse a few people out there that actually really know their history in wrestling. There were actually two Hoot Gibsons. There was the prelim guy who worked the ICW for Poffo and things of that nature, but Robert Gibson of the Rock and Roll Express also had the nickname Hoot Gibson. So which one are you talking about here? Are you talking about Robert Gibson, or are you talking about actually Hoot Gibson who worked down there in that Knoxville area in the ICW?
I'm talking about Knoxville Hoot.
Okay.
He was like a mortician, I think, at a funeral home. He prepared bodies for burial.
Wow, that's morbid to know.
Well, he was a good buddy with Garvin, and he worked for us, and he was okay.
Yeah.
But afterwards I asked him, what the fuck are you holding me for? I said, you're holding me. He was holding me let me continue down the story.
Sure.
They pushed me out of the bar. There were two entrances, one from the outside and one from the inside. The one they pushed me out into was a hallway, and about 6 feet from the entry, the door to the bar, which opened out into the hallway, was a door to the lobby, and that was closed. Well, they pushed me up against that door, and I'm trying to get the guys to let go of me, and they were, the fight got them all shook up or something. I got one guy on each arm, one guy behind me holding me by the waist, and the door opens. We almost fell through it, and I look up, and Andre the Giant's standing there. And I thought, well, I hope he's not working for the other side here, because I really don't want to mess with him. I don't care how many blackjacks I got. But he didn't have anything to do with it. He just said, oh, hey, all right. He went in the bar. Well, they're holding on to me. I'm trying to get them to let go of me. And Slater walks out of the bar. Now, I'm standing 5 feet away with three guys holding me. He walks out of the bar, and instead of coming towards me, he takes a left, and he's leaving. He's walking, instead of going out the door to the outside where everybody inside, including all the guys working for him, would see him leave. He comes out the hallway door like he's maybe going up to get a room or go to the bath, for some reason, but he was actually trying to get out of there. And I knew that if he got out of there, the way it ended up, like right then, the story would go out there, and it did anyway. The story would go out there the way he kicked my butt, because I hadn't done anything to him.
Well, you were being held back, too, so it was like people were, quote-unquote, saving you from getting beat up further, even though you weren't touched at this point.
Yeah. So I immediately said, hey, where are you going? I said, what, are you leaving? Yeah, I knew you were gutless. I said, look, I got three guys holding me. That's not enough. You still with three guys holding me, you won't take me on? Come on, you gutless chicken shit. And of course he had to come, because these guys are all listening.
Right.
And two of them are wrestlers. And telephone, telegram, tele-wrestler, they heard me call him a chicken shit. And he can't just leave, because that would prove I was right. So here he comes. Now, meanwhile, I had my right arm. I'd been fighting, and I had it clenched, but I extended it, lifted my right leg far enough that I got my hand on it blackjack. And when Slater came, he grabbed me. I was bobbing and weaving, so he couldn't just walk up and just out of the blue, just blast me and knock me cold, because he could punch.
That's what I hear.
He could. And he always sucker punch guys. But so he grabbed me by the hair, and the first time I made a swipe at him, I just kind of grazed him. But the second time, I got a second shot, and I whacked him good. I whacked him good right on the temple, and it busted him open. I mean, it wasn't like 15, 20 stitches, but he was bleeding. And he backed up, and about Tommy Rich came out of the bar about that time. Slater let Tommy Rich grab him and pull him out of the bar, pull him out of that hallway. And obviously he wanted Tommy to pull him out of there. So I said it. I said out loud, that's right. You better let that guy pull you out of here before I kill you. So off they went. I'll swear, this is almost too much, but I'm not going to swear on my children's life. I'll just say this. Dick Slater has never put one fingernail on me in anger. He's never punched me. He's never scratched me. He's never bit me. He's never kicked me. He's never done one thing to me. But no, he never put one. I was reading, you talked about Terry Funk earlier. I was reading his book. I liked it. Terry signed it to me. He was selling it at Waterloo to a great guy, Bob. I'm reading his book, and I loved it. I got halfway through it, and I read about Dick Slater beating Bob Roop And Bob Roop was a really tough guy. So and I closed the book. I still hadn't finished it. And I always wanted to tell Terry too, but I never got a chance. And now he's gone. But I mean, I just want to tell him, Terry, I don't know what you heard, but I want you at least hear another side of it.
Right.
So anyway, that was the fight with Dick Slater. And it wasn't a fight. He never laid, a fight takes two people need to do some kind of offensive action. His deal was once his sneak attack, the sucker punch and all that, he had a history of doing it all the way back to when he was a teenager. He and Mike Graham would go out. And, I heard this from a friend. I'm not going to middle their friend by saying his name, but there's someone who knew them both very well all through high school. They would go out to the bars where servicemen from MacDill Air Force Base would be in the bar, and they would wait for some guy to come out by himself, and Mike Graham would get in his face and call him with some kind of puke or something. And while the guy was paying attention to Mike, Slater would come up behind him and sucker punch the guy, and they'd both put the boots to him and take off. Now, I heard that from a friend of theirs, or, a guy who knew him, or grew up with him. But when I talk about Slater being a sucker puncher, it's fighting is funny. Paul Orndorff beat up Van Bader, from what I hear.
Yeah, stomped him in flip-flops.
I was astounded to hear that, because not that I thought Paul wasn't capable. I just didn't think he had a fighting heart that way. But again, it might be because of the way that guys were with me. And I'm not trying to say, I'm this big bad guy, but I was an Olympian. And all those guys knew, like Paul knew from working out with me when he broke in, I took him down with ease. I'd have him down on we'd be facing each other. He'd be down on the mat without knowing how I got there and on his back. And I'd be in there putting him where I could put him in a sugar hole if I wanted to. So they knew, they knew. And then now 10 years later, I'm not that same guy that was training them 10 years back. But I still, as far as they knew, I still had it. I still had the ability to do it. Plus, I could fight. I can kick and punch and bite and pick up rocks and whatever, just like anybody else. No, they didn't. I don't think any one of them wanted to have anything to do with me. Slater had to do something when I came in the bar, and that was my reason for going there. Was I wanted to let them know that I didn't actually expect him to fight me, but I was glad he did. And then again, when the story gets out that, Slater beat Bob Roop. Yeah, right. I'd like to just say this. I'm an Olympian. I was a national champion. I was of military service. I was a paratrooper. I made 11 jumps. I was a Special Forces trainee. I didn't get my Green Beret because I needed to re-enlist for 3 years in order to have the time to complete my training, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go back I had an offer to go back to college and wrestle, so on a wrestling scholarship. So I took that instead. But I did a year and a half of training with Green Berets. You think if Slater had beat me up in a bar, that there wouldn't have been some comeback? That I wouldn't have found him somewhere alone, just me and him? Anybody out there that thinks that? I mean, how could someone with that kind of background, how would they take a beating like that and just let it stand, especially in a business where your reputation is what people says it is? Roop got beat up by Slater. And all the guys that hate shooters would love that because, they think because I could wrestle for real, I had to be some kind of rotten guy. And yet I never, ever even got stiff with anybody working the ring with me that didn't do it, didn't start it. And that only happened in foreign countries, not in the United States. So anyway, that was the extent of the fight.
So not really much of a fight from either side. I mean, you clocked him a good one, but really it wasn't like a fight.
No.
As compared to the story that I've heard from various sources, or at least a couple sources. I can't say various. I don't know Terry Funk's book. I've read Terry Funk's book. I just don't recall that part of it because it's such a great book, but a very long book and lots of other things I was more focused on in there. But you've always, you've talked highly about Terry Funk and your time in Amarillo, the fun times you've had with him. So it's not like, you've ever degraded him or go against the things that Terry says or does. But in this instance, Terry was told a story and, he wrote it in his book as fact. And maybe, the proof wasn't there, and it was in there anyway. But I've actually heard Dick tell the story in a shoot interview in the past. Basically the story, not a whole lot to it. I mean, it wasn't like some major thing, but he said that, he got clocked. He said one time with the blackjack, but Apparently, you didn't hit him hard enough because it didn't do anything to him. And then he, I guess he proceeded to beat you up. That was Dick Slater's version of it. But I've also heard Ric Flair tell the story, which blows my mind because he wasn't even there. But he told the story.
Let me say something.
Please do.
Rick, if you're listening, you and I are both honorees in the Waterloo Hall of Fame. I hope to see you there next year.
Wow.
I want to ask you about this. Where you got this story, and why are you telling it?
Okay, so
it's a lie. I'm telling you right now, you are telling a lie. Woo!
Well, I don't know. I guess he got the story from Slater. I don't know. I don't think he says where, because the way he tells it, it was like he was there. Like it's fact. Like he was like, oh yeah. I think it was on his podcast. I could be wrong. I can't remember where I heard him say it, but it was in recent weeks, maybe a month or two ago, that I heard this. I just happened to cross over this. It may have been on YouTube. But Flair said that he was talking about how badass Dick Slater was and how he could knock people out and, really screw them up. And he says, and then he uses you as the reference. Oh, yeah, knocked that Bob Roop out. He was laid out in a pool of his own blood. Blood all around. Like I envisioned you the way Flair told the story. You're laying there knocked out, I guess blood pouring out of your head. It's the way I envisioned the way Flair told the story. But he didn't just tell it. He told it like, he didn't say I was there, but he told it as if he was there. He saw this. And Slater never even told the story that way. So that's why it really blew my mind.
Well, I'll tell you something. I'm burning a little bit right now. That pisses me off. Rick, I'm going to be talking to you. It sounds like you enjoy telling that story.
Yeah.
Let me give some another reference here to give me some credibility. I didn't get away unscathed during my whole wrestling career. After I had retired from active wrestling, I was in my 40s. I went to a show in Miami, and Blackjack Mulligan was on the show. And Jack and I had worked together. We had worked when I was with the Prince of Darkness. I'd worked against Jack a bunch of times,
right?
As Mayhaw sang, but he had quit when Kevin didn't get the book, and I did. Mulligan quit, and so I walk in the dressing room and say hi to him, and he walks up, and I'd made the mistake of looking away from him. All of a sudden, I'm on the floor. And bang zoom, and he's on top of me, and he's just raving, and he's trying to punch me again, and I managed to fight my way out from underneath him, and because when he hit me, it cut my eyelid, and I was bleeding down into my left eye, and it was numb there. He had punched me right over the eye. I thought maybe my eye was damaged, so I wasn't going to stay. And plus, I'm in a dressing room where I'm not booked. I just went in there because, we were running a wrestling company down there.
Right.
Dr. Roberts and Mike Brandon and I were together and went down Cosgrove was on the show. I went down to say hello to some guys. And Mulligan had a history of doing that kind of thing. In fact, a couple of days later, I was talking to Cosgrove, Missouri. He told me that he saw Mulligan in the hotel later that night, and Mulligan told him to tell me that he was sorry, that he didn't, he just lost it. Okay. And he had done that before. He did it to Buck Robley one time. He did it to Ole one time.
Wow.
So
Ole Anderson and Blackjack Mulligan, I would pay to see that one. I heard the story that he got into it like that with Andre one time in a hotel room, and they come blasting out the door, fighting, like wrestling, kind of grappling fighting, but they were fighting legitimately. And like they were perfectly fine the next day, but I guess Mulligan just kind of started it with Andre out of the blue. So he clearly didn't care who he picked to fight with.
Well, he'd lose it. I don't know what his psychological problem was, but obviously he had one because I hadn't done anything to him. And like I said, he told Cosgrove to tell me. I talked to him years later. I called and I was going to look him up too. Maybe
Blackjack?
He'd have been maybe if he, because he sucker punched me.
You don't forget about it.
I wasn't going to just take it. I mean, I had it on my resume now that Roop got knocked off his head over. And Tony Atlas, hey, Tony. Tony Atlas was there cheering. I jumped up, down, get him, Jack, get him.
Oh,
like
wow.
He wanted him to kill me. So I don't have a lot of fondness for Tony Atlas even now. Even 35, 40 years later, you don't forget some things like that.
Yeah,
I had never put myself in a position to be sucker punched because I didn't have it coming. If I had it coming, I would go in with a suit of armor on and a machine gun in my hands. If I got it coming and I have to go in there, But no, I didn't have it coming. Nobody needed to sucker punch me because I hadn't done anything to him.
Right.
And I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything to Jack. So, what happened? You need to wait a few years. If you're going to look somebody up and you're going to do something serious, you need to wait a while. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't make a habit of doing this, but this deserved redress. I needed to do it for my own peace of mind. But you don't do it to where you end up going to jail. You got to do it in a way that's smart. So you let 3 or 4 years go by. Well, the years went by, and Blackjack went to prison for counterfeit.
Counterfeit, right? Yeah.
And only the sad thing was he took poor Kendall, his son, with him.
Right.
And I like Jack okay, but I really like Kendall.
Yeah, you made that clear last episode, yeah.
And Barry, yeah, I like those guys are good guys. I like them a lot. And great talents. Kendall's poor Buddy
Buddy Colt.
Yeah, you said he's too skinny. I'm telling you, that made the guy the perfect white meat baby face. You just, and plus he had all these warrants from people he'd beat up in bars. You're saying he's too skinny.
Should have put that over on TV. Kendall Windham, for any doubters out there, we just want you to know he has all these warrants out for him right now. So,
yeah, apparently in real life he's not all that skinny,
or that much of a baby face, for that matter.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I'm telling a story about myself about Blackjack Mulligan.
Right.
I got knocked flat. I mean, I was 1 minute I'm standing, the next minute I'm on my back, and he's on top of me.
Right.
So it's not like I went through my whole life and career without being ever, unscathed. But to me, Jack going to prison was enough payback as far as I was concerned. Okay. I was really sad that Kendall had to go too. He got caught up in the mess too. But what more? I mean, finding a guy taking a baseball bat to his knees or something like that. How's that going? I mean, 3 or 4 years in prison certainly tops that. Plus, I don't have to be involved. I don't have to compromise my own freedom and conscience doing something like that. But
right.
I had been thinking about it. So I only trot that out to go back to Slater because it really grinds me. I don't mind Blackjack Mulligan knocked me down. I mind that Slater touched me with one fingernail because he wasn't capable.
What kills me about this is even when Slater told the story, even if it's inaccurate, it's not like he overdid it. Like he just said he got hit with a blackjack. It wasn't hard enough to do serious damage to knock him out or anything. And then he proceeded to beat you up, which is enough. I get it. If you're Bob Roop, that's too much. But he didn't embellish it to where I had his eye hanging out and, all this other nonsense that you could do when you're making these things up. It was just, we had a fight and I won, whether he won or not. You're telling the story is, hey man, I got him good. And, the fight was kind of broken up or Slater took off, whatever you want to call that. So it really wasn't a whole big giant deal, but it got turned into one, through these other wrestlers, like you say, telephone, telegraph, wrestler. And, they all tell their own versions of the story. And obviously, Dickie told the story a lot more than you did over the years. So, he's the one that came out the winner. Ric Flair, though, I think he overdid it because I've never even heard Slater address it in that fashion. So that's the one where I just kind of rolled my eyes and I kind of considered the source there. But again, guys, don't hate Bob for what I have to say. That's just my opinion with the Nature Boy. And again, I loved his work, loved his matches, but whenever we talk about, some of these guys, their real life persona, if you will, it's just, not my cup of tea. But that was just an interesting story. It took a while to get through, and I'm not saying that in a negative way at all. I love that you broke it down. You went back in time. You talked all about your past dealings with Dick. Never really had a problem with him there. You kind of poked the bear there with those chicken things in the paper. I love that. That's awesome. But that would happen a lot between Jerry Jarrett and actually Lawler. Well, the Pavo promotion more so than the Jerry Jarrett side, but they would call them out on TV and stuff. You probably know a little bit about that. But
right.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to hear that those sort of things. But obviously, Dick Slater had no option but to get it on with you there. You came looking for him, so to speak, and it was what it was. And I'm assuming, did you ever cross paths with him again in Georgia or anything like that?
When I was booking in Florida, we were thinking South Florida, maybe in Miami. I don't, somewhere we're in the gym. I don't remember why, but the dressing room was in kind of a place that had some weights in it. And Slater came in. He didn't walk up to me, but he came in and, I nodded at him and asked him what he wanted. I'd been a few years since Knoxville. Mm-hmm. And, I just nodded at him and, what do you want? And, he said, I came to talk to so-and-so and whatever. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't keep my eyes on him. When he walked in, I knew he didn't have anything on his mind.
Right.
But, he's gone, and let's put things in perspective. Slater made the news twice. After I don't even remember, I don't know how he ended up being in a wheelchair at a very young age, but he was. And twice, not once, but twice, he was arrested, one time for stabbing.
Attempted murder.
Attempted murder on a woman who was living with him, taking care of him. He stabbed her, and where did he stab her? He stabbed her in the back. She was trying to get away from him. And he was arrested, of course. What I saw was on the internet. I saw, they didn't have TikTok then, but whatever. I saw a mugshot of him twice, beating up women. One of them was Luna, Luna Vachon.
Yeah.
And the second one, I don't know if he stabbed. I think he just beat her up, but she told me about that. But the woman he stabbed, it was attempted murder. And she was trying to get away from him. He stabbed her in the back. What should I say that could be any worse than that? And what he said about himself with that kind of behavior.
Well, that's what kills me. I go on the Facebook, and every once in a while, somebody just wants to say, try to get at me, I guess. And it doesn't really, it's like, okay. But, it's just out of the blue, I'll post a new show, Bob Roop, episode 10. This is what we're talking about. And somebody just randomly responds, why don't you ask Bob about the time Dick Slater kicked his ass? Why don't you ask Bob about, so I get those, and that's why I wanted to do this here. But it's kind of funny how some of these people would rather listen to Ric Flair and then Dick Slater, who has attempted to murder someone, female or male. He's, attempted murder. I mean, that's out there, guys. It happened. It's in the news. You can go Google it right now. You'd rather trust what he says versus Bob Roop, because once upon a time, Bob Roop tried to run against Ron Fuller. Where are your morals, wrestling fans? I just don't understand it. Well, yeah, I know Dick Slater tried to kill that girl, but Bob Roop ran againt Ron Fuller. That's not cool.
Yeah.
So it's just,
she probably had it coming. She was helping Roop run against Ron Fuller. Yeah.
I didn't even put that together. Okay. Is that what happened? No, I'm just kidding. But so I love that we were able to, go through that whole story and just kind of pick it apart. And I want to do this too. I want to clarify this too, Bob, real quick before we move on and whatever else you got to say. But there was a story, and it's not a story, it actually happened. 1986, a very young Sting. People know where I'm going with this. Apparently he took a ride. He was very young, green to the business. He took a ride to a show for Bill Watts and the UWF by Dark Journey, who at the time was the girlfriend of Dick Slater for at least another week or two anyway. And that was a no-no, at least, in Dick Slater's world. He proceeds to enter the locker room and beat the living piss out of Sting. He roughed him up pretty good from my understanding. And Sting was teaming with the future Ultimate Warrior at the time. And so the story goes, Dick Murdoch came in and he pinned the Warrior up against the wall while the fight was going on. Murdoch wasn't really trying to get involved in the fight. He just wanted to make sure the Warrior wasn't going to help Sting out. That's all Murdoch was doing. But I guess Slater beat the piss out of Sting and then stuck his face in the toilet, gave him a swirly. And a lot of people confuse that with your fight as well. They confuse all of this. I've even heard people insert you into the Wahoo story with the gun. So people get all of this mixed up and they don't really, they're not able to dissect it all. So I wanted to point that out here too, that you were not involved in the gun incident with Wahoo. You were not involved with a toilet anywhere that I'm aware of anyway. So I just wanted to clarify all these things happen individually.
Well, Slater's dead. The Ultimate Warrior's gone, unfortunately. Way too young. And Murdoch's gone.
Right.
I'm still here. And Hook Gibson, Tommy Rich was the one that pulled Slater. I mean, Slater was pushing Tommy to pull him out of there. He was trying to let Tommy know, hey, pull me out quick. But Tommy might not remember it that way.
I was going to say, do you think Tommy even remembers that night?
I don't know. Tommy, I made allusion to it about the thing in Cleveland. He was going to kick my butt. Tommy has not always been a big fan of mine. And so I don't know. Maybe he prefers, and like you say, who knows how clear anybody's mind has been.
Right. Well, there's a lot of guys that don't even remember what happened in their own world sometimes, just from years of, time. So I guess, I get what you're saying there too. I mean, maybe they remember it wrong. Maybe they don't remember it at all. Maybe it was a blip on the radar because, it's wrestling and a lot of crazy shit went on back in the day.
To a point, and this isn't I'm not trying to curry favor with you, but if you got people giving you grief over your product, your website, and all the wrestling information you have out there, you're going to have that. You know why? You've got a good product and you're successful. And you're going to get people that don't have a pot to piss in terms of being able to do what you do, who are going to say, you, blah, 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 something about you. It would be like if someone of great note got a DUI or something.
Right.
And then you said, well, your whole career and your whole life you spent your life saving crippled children and getting them healed and all that, but you had that DUI, so now I know you're really a rotten guy. Your whole life you've been a rotten guy at heart. You're going to get grief from people. It's good in a way because, it gives us something to talk about. What might be fun somewhere down the line is to have a seminar with me and Flair. And I don't know, I guess maybe get Hoot Gibson. I don't know, Tommy, I don't know what he would remember. But to get some other people in there, Ronnie Garvin and Orton and, Malenko's gone. They can tell you that if Slater beat me up, I would have had a mark on me somewhere.
Right.
And, never. In fact, I didn't have much of a mark from Mulligan, although I did have some swelling but I put ice on it right away. And my eyelid, the blood in my eye my eyelid had a little cut on it. No, I wasn't even from that. I was fortunate. He could have hit me in the mouth and knocked my teeth out or broken my jaw or broken my nose or injured my eye.
Well, Mulligan was a big dude. I mean, I'm sure his hand was probably kind of like that Harley Race hand. I'm sure you've seen that a few times.
Right. Well, I'm standing there relaxed, I'm not tensed up or I'm just like, so, he was able to hit me while I was looking away from him.
Sure, yeah.
I was lucky I was able to, he would have hurt me much worse if I hadn't been able to get myself out from underneath him. But adrenaline has a way of working that way. So, yeah, I've been on the wrong side of violence and, the downside of getting my butt, harmed.
You've been rocked.
Yeah, I've been rocked. And so I know what it feels like. I don't have a problem that it was Mulligan that did it. I said earlier that I was going to redress things, but him going to prison was worse than anything I had in mind for him. So fate took care of it for me. If you do violence against people, even if it's justified, you tarnish your own psyche and your emotional, your self-respect and all that sort of thing.
Right.
It's one thing if you're defending yourself or defending your loved ones, or defending the right or the good of your society. But if it's just a personal thing that you're embarrassed or whatever, you got to give tit for tat. If somebody smacked you, so you got to go break their leg or whatever. That's never good for you. So I'm glad I didn't have to do it. It would make me less of a person than I am today, and not that what I am today is anything, about. But I'm at peace with myself, and I think that's one of the attributes that keep people alive.
Right.
Is that they can look at themselves in the mirror and they're not repulsed or anything by what they see. So again, the thing with Slater, Dickie was his own worst enemy, and with that stuff he did with the girls.
I can only speak from a fan standpoint in Dick Slater. Never met the guy, don't know him. I've read some things, obviously, attempted murder, things of that nature. You got to call into question the character of Richard Van Slater. However, at the same time, as a fan growing up, I liked Dick Slater. I liked his style. I thought he was a great heel, probably for good reason. But, obviously I've read and heard stories for decades now about maybe just a little bit how off Dick Slater was outside of the business or outside of the ring.
Dickie was a natural. He took to the ring right away. I mean, much quicker than I did. Back to Terry Funk's book for a second. Slater adored Terry Funk. He wanted to be Terry
Funk. Right, yeah. He
wanted to be Terry Funk. He walked around. He actually started walking and acting like he was left-handed for a while. And he's not. He's right-handed. But he'd walk around left-handed. And he wanted to be Terry Funk. He adored Terry. He wanted to be just like him. He tried to be... And, Slater, I think, thought he could be other people if he just tried hard enough. But he just adored Terry. Oh, yeah. And so when I know that, I can understand why Terry would write something in his book. Terry and I got along. I love Terry Funk. I didn't know him well enough personally, but his turn as a colleague as a member of the same business I was in, and the interactions I had with them, they were all really great. And, Terry was a lovable guy. The story I told you about, with the beer, his pants falling down in the gas station with the cop standing there. That's all really funny stuff when I look back at it, It made my life better. And so...
how could it not?
Yeah. So like I say, I didn't say, I wanted to find Terry Funk and cuss him out. I said I wanted to talk to him about it.
Right.
And just, but no, I don't have any problem with Terry because you know why? I respected Terry. I respected the hell out of him. Plus, when we worked together in West Palm Beach, I was the assistant booker. I was running the town. But it would have been absolutely malpractice for me not to get everything from Terry. Terry started booking probably when he was 10 years old, or at least running ideas through with his dad, or at least listening and hearing stuff.
Right.
And then, with what his older brother was doing, Dory Jr., all that stuff that he was doing. So, this guy was he was like the Smithsonian Museum, the Library of Congress of pro wrestling that I had at my disposal down there in Palm Beach. And he was kind enough to share a lot of stuff with me. So yeah, I love that guy. I mean, I respected people in the business, but I didn't have affection to go with it. But with Terry, I did.
Okay.
So I just want to say,
I don't know too many people. I don't know anybody, honestly, who has anything bad to say about Terry Funk. Maybe you can tell the story. Man, he made me mad that night. But I mean, in general, as a human being, everybody seemed to get along with Terry and like him, which is, just really great. Says a lot, especially for somebody who was in the business as long as he was.
Right.
All right. Well, that was the story of the big bar fight between Bob Roop and Dick Slater, everybody. So there, if you ever need to listen to anything about that, again, we can reference this episode. So we'll move on now. And last week, we kind of set the stage for this. We did a lot of talking about several wrestlers that you encountered across your life there in the 1970s. Of course, Bobby Shane, Buddy Colt, the manager and wrestler Gary Hart, and of course, Austin Idol Dahlin. So we go back now, and we're going to talk about the plane crash that you were actually there. You didn't witness the crash, but you were there after the crash to help some of these guys out. That's what we're here to talk about today because, I went back and I looked through Gary Hart's book, and I'm sure there's some embellishment here, not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, not trying to hurt his son's feelings, who is a great guy, and, he loved his dad. But I think even Austin Idol said, some of these injuries that Gary Hart wrote about here weren't necessarily as bad as Gary. Not Bobby Shane passed away. That's fact. And some of these injuries were pretty bad. They did happen, but maybe Gary added to them, if that's fair to say. But that's what we're here today. We're going to talk about not necessarily what those guys remember, but what you remember from the other end, being there at the bay after the plane crash and seeing these guys in this terrible accident.
Okay.
So what I want to do, if it's okay with you, Bob, is I'm not going to read directly out of Gary's book, but I did take some notes here, just very briefly. And I'm not going to get into what you saw or anything that happened after the crash. I'm just going to discuss what happened to lead to the crash that fateful night there. We go back actually to February 19th, 1975. You guys finished up a show in Miami. I'm assuming you were there as well.
Yes.
Now, after the matches, I guess it's reported that Shane Colt, Austin Idol, and Gary Hart, they left the arena. They went out to go get something to eat somewhere called Wolfie's, according to Gary Hart. Not sure if you remember that place. But they decide they're going to ride a plane to the next town, over to Tampa. It's Buddy Colt flying the plane, single engine, to go back to Tampa Bay. So Buddy's flying the plane. He's got Austin Idol up next to him in the front, and in the back behind them, Gary Hart and Bobby Shane. I guess the story goes, Buddy asked them if they wanted to go to Sarasota because there was reportedly going to be a storm in Tampa that night. But they spoke to somebody and they said, no, you'll be clear. Just come on through. And they decide, okay, we're headed off to Tampa Bay. And the story from there goes, by the time they got to Tampa, everything was foggy. There was a little bit of a storm maybe there. And there were issues. Apparently, according to Austin Idol, Buddy Colt was only visually trained to fly a plane. He wasn't meter rated, which means he didn't really know how to read all the meters there, all the gadgets. So he was actually getting talked through how to land here because he couldn't really read the meter deal. So apparently they tried to land on first approach, and at least according to Austin Idol, they were just a little too high to make the landing. So they had to go back around and try it a second time. And that's when I guess Idol realized, according to Gary Hart's book, Idol was the one that shouted out, "Pull up! You're going to hit the water." And Idol he hasn't said that part, but he said that he did see the white caps, and then boom, they crashed into the water. We're going to get into what you saw after that, and then I'll tell like Gary Hart's version, Austin Idol's version. We're going to see what jives and what doesn't. But at this point, Gary Hart does say in his book that the first person he sees is Bob Roop's girlfriend. So I'll let you take it from there and tell me how she got there or how she heard about it, how you got there, and you can just tell the entire story from here. And then after you're done, we'll look at their version.
Well, we knew we were behind Buddy Colt's plane. By the way, it was a twin engine, and he was not qualified yet to fly twin engines. He was also not qualified to take passengers, but that somehow made it by. And Buddy's gone. I don't want to bring any grief to him, but we were behind them. And when we did get up to near Sarasota, we had been told we were going to have to land. We were going to have to land in Sarasota because the fog was so bad in Tampa that there was no place to land. The fog was too low. So, but once we got up near Sarasota, they said, "Well, let's open up." Now, Buddy had flown those guys from Tampa to Miami, and now he's bringing them back.
Yeah, I think the only difference was Austin Idol wasn't in the initial flight up. Gary Hart actually talked him into taking this flight back down to Tampa.
Okay. Yeah, well, I didn't know any of the details about that.
No, yeah, I knew you weren't involved in any of that. I just want to, give everybody kind of an idea of what was going on. And also, I think it was Tampa International was closed. So they were told they had to go, if they wanted to land at all, they had to go to Peter O'Knight, which is like a private airport or something like that.
Oh, man. Yeah, it was a little bitty, there's a little island type thing.
That's what Idol said. It was an island.
Yeah, and the runway is real short. Untrained pilots should not be maybe taking off, but not landing on that thing, especially at night.
In the fog.
Yeah. Well, the fog had lifted enough that once you got probably below 100. But, now here is the problem of knowing how having fog until you get down to 100 feet. And by not being able to read the meter and the distance, all the gauges that tell you where you are, juxtaposition with the airport, that when you come out of the fog, you're too high and the runway's right there. You're not going to. Now, a skilled pilot, Ronnie Garvin, for example, could have made it. He would have just done it, scared the hell out of everybody by doing it look like he was going to do a dive to get himself lower. And like he was going to do a dive, like he'd think he was going to crash the plane, and then he'd pull it up, but he'd lose 100 feet or whatever in a few seconds. But Buddy Colt didn't have the expertise to do that. Anyway, we were behind him, and when we got to the airport, what I saw my van. I had a Ford Econoline or something like that, non-glamorous vehicle. And my girlfriend would come to pick me up, and I see the van is tearing across a field. There's roads, but there's a flat field. Instead of being on the road, the van is tearing. I assume she's driving. It's tearing across this field back towards the airport, which is just a little bitty place. So we landed and get out, and she runs up and she said, "Oh, the plane crashed out there." I don't know if she told me it was Buddy Colt's plane, but anyway, I jumped in the van and assumed if Buddy's plane wasn't there at the airport, so I assumed it was him. So jumped back in the van, and I was driving, but she directed me, tore back over there, and she showed me where she had seen the guys coming up to the dock, but she was too small to pull them out. Coming up to the seawall was about 3 feet high, but it was smooth at the top. It was cement or concrete, and it was smooth at the top. There wasn't anything you could grab. Even if you could get up high enough, there wasn't anything you could grab to pull yourself out, like a handhold, and there were no steps or anything. Now, there was a dock about 40 or 50 feet down, but when I got there, all four of the guys, nobody was on land yet. They were all in the water. And I immediately started pulling them out. And I don't remember, I think I pulled Gary out first because he looked the worst. And, when I pulled him out, I had I believe his right arm with my right arm. And then I pulled the rest of the guys out. And McCord you just had the toe. And so, he was able to help me a little bit once I got him up close enough to the seawall or up over the lip, he could help himself out. Colt needed help because his ankle was bad. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Bobby was not there. But once I pulled Hart out, he was still laying. It was up like on an elbow. And I noticed that he was bleeding pretty heavily from his head. It was dripping down on the, I could see it. I had a searchlight type light on by my driver's side window that I had aimed down there, so he had some light down there. And I could see the blood dripping off him. And I asked him, "Is there anybody? Who else was with you?" He said, "Well, Shane." So, well, where is he? Well, we don't know. So I went. I mean, I'm only standing about 2 feet from the seawall. So I look out towards the bay. I mean, I don't remember how dark it was, but I didn't. I couldn't see anything really. So I thought about it for a minute, about maybe going in and trying to see about seeing if I could find him. So if he was in the water, he would be gone. He would have drowned by now. So but I still thought about it. And now I read the paper back then. I knew about sharks in Tampa Bay. A lot of passenger ships and ships that come in there dump their refuse, their garbage, and a lot of food in their garbage, and the sharks just are there. They've got free food just coming out of those ships all the time. So they don't even have to hunt for it. It just comes floating down to them. So I wasn't real thrilled about the idea. But about that time, Hart's pointing out he's out that way. And again, he's up on one elbow and he can see the water. He's looking out towards the water. And we hear this splashing noise. And I looked down and all I saw was, it looked like a board coming up out of the water. And it was a hammerhead shark. And, you always exaggerate these things. I'm going to cut it in like a third and say it had this hammer-type head, like a board at the front end of the shark. It's got to be at least 3 feet wide. And it's got big eyeballs, like about the size of 50 cent pieces at each end of it. And it rolls up with one of those eyeballs looking up at us. And then it went back down, and the rest of its body kind of came up and went down. The thing had to be 10 to 12 feet long. Well, I wasn't going in the water with that thing there. I think about it. But Gary was bleeding profusely from his head, and I think from a wound somewhere on his body. McCord still had to bleed like crazy because it's real vascular down there. You've got a lot of veins going into your feet, to keep them.
I think you touched on that last week, but clarify to everybody out there the injury that you saw on Austin Idol.
Well, it would be like somebody took a sharp, small ice cream scoop, sharp, and just gouged out about 3/4 of his big toe, the bottom of his big toe. Yeah. I mean, it was just a big hole there. Yeah. It did go all the way through. I mean, you could see, but I mean, it was still bleeding. Right. He had to bleed so those guys left a trail of blood behind them while they were swimming, strangling, however they got back there. Mm-hmm. And they're there in the water. And I mean, I'm not saying I saved them, but I know that shark was there within a minute after I got there. And if they'd been in the water, I can't imagine it wasn't going to try to get a meal out of somebody. Right. McCord bleeding, Gary Hart bleeding. But, I talked to Gary, and my understanding is his own version of it, that he had all kinds of broken things.
I know he had some injuries. He said he didn't realize he had them until after this was all over with. Obviously, there's a lot of adrenaline and other things going on at this point, I'd have to think. But I know he did suffer some back injuries because he never walked the same again. He couldn't take a bump anymore, not a real bump anyway. So there were some injuries there for certain. But, his main thing, and I don't want to say this like the other injury, like a back injury isn't worse, but the main thing that was noticeable that you talked about that Gary mentioned too was he was lacerated everywhere on his head. He said his nose, the tip of his nose was, kind of sliced open. But I guess it took like over 200 stitches to close him up because he had so many different lacerations, because he was actually ejected, thrown from the plane, because he said as soon as he heard Austin Idol say we're going to crash, he unbuckled. So when the plane crashed, Gary was the one that got tossed from the plane. Like Austin Idol, he was stuck in there, and he was stuck in his seatbelt, and he had to force himself out of his seatbelt. And when he did that, I guess the front end of the plane had smashed down, and the rudders, that's what you talked about, Buddy Colt's ankle or his foot or whatever. It was the rudders that got wrapped around it and smashed into Austin Idol's ankles and Buddy Colt's ankles. So that's kind of where Austin wiggled out of his cowboy boots, he says, and got his, his foot torn, his toe torn. And that's how Buddy Colt got the, the injury to his ankle as well, was when they were trying to get out of the plane. But Gary Hart, by all accounts from everybody involved, he was thrown from the plane.
Well, that's interesting because I heard a different version.
Okay.
I heard the version was that when Buddy came out of the fog and was preparing to land, he saw that he was too high. So instead of landing, he might have even gotten down much lower and close to the runway. And then, so now he sees he's halfway down it. He hadn't touched down yet, that he's going to run out of runway. So he puts the gas pedal down and takes off again.
Right.
And my understanding was that when he circled around to come back for a second try, he was deliberately keeping the plane low because that way, he wouldn't have to make that descent.
Yeah.
He could come in and he could see the runway much better. He could come in and be much closer to it.
Right.
But his mistake was that when he turned to circle back, when you turn and where you're say at a 45-degree angle, your wings lose lift. I mean, what keeps the plane aloft is wind under the wings, and on top of them too. The one that goes over the top has a suction effect of pulling up, and the wind that goes underneath has an uplifting effect. So when he turned, he should have taken a big, wide turn where he didn't actually bank his wings at all. He kept them level, especially when you're 100 feet off the water. But he turned, and when he did, he lost lift. And when he lost lift, the plane just fell into the bay. Mm-hmm. And my understanding was that it fell in upside down. And Gary hurt his head so bad by falling through the top of the plane.
He said he went through the plane. I mean, I'm just going off of, I wasn't there. I can only go off of what they said. I've seen Gary say that he was thrown from the plane. I've seen Austin Idol say it, but Idol he didn't see where any of these guys went. He found these guys after the crash. So obviously nobody even realized Bobby Shane was still in the plane until after the fact. So it's not like Austin saw it. So maybe he's going off of what Gary said or whatever too. But according to Gary, he was thrown from the plane. I mean, he didn't make it, like a big deal or anything like that. So it just sounded like, that was potentially what happened there.
I think the only two doors were up front. So I don't know how he'd be thrown. Well, it's your story. That's the thing. With wrestlers, it's your story. You can tell it any way you want to. I just know what I heard at the time.
Right.
Was that the plane basically fell into the bay. That Buddy turned too sharp and the wings lost their lift and the plane fell out of the sky.
Well,
and
God bless Gary Hart, and he's gone now. And again, I'm not trying to attack him at all because, great mind, great for the business and all that good stuff. But, there's a part of this story too, where he's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Forrest Gump, where they're at war there and Forrest keeps running back in and pulling another man out, going back in and pulling another man out, and that's kind of how Gary tells this story here too, is he got Austin Idol, he pedaled him to the wall. Then he went back and got Buddy Colt and took him to the wall. Then he kind of went back and he searched for Bobby Shane, but he couldn't find him. So he finally gave up. And that seemed a little bit much, I thought, and I don't think Austin Idol tells his story exactly that way either. Though Idol did admit out of everybody, that made it out of there, that Gary Hart probably was the most capable of actually, getting around on his feet because, Idol had the foot rip, but his ankles were also injured. And then Buddy Colt, obviously, you've talked about that on the last episode. You talked about it a couple times now, his leg injury, his ankle injury.
Well, there's another factor involved. Gary still had a sport coat. He always wore a sport coat or a suit coat. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. He still had, I don't know why, he still had his coat on when he showed up at the wall. When I pulled him out, he still had his coat on. So I don't know why he didn't take it off, because, he's trying not to drown. Another factor, and again, it's Gary's story. God bless Gary. Rest in peace, Gary. I was one of his Gary Hart's army. I was one of the army, and I like Gary because Gary knew the office hold. He was smart to the business, so I could talk to him. He was educational. He could give me tips and things.
Right.
So I admired it. I admired him as a manager. I thought he was really good. So I would go see him when he was hurt. I went to see him at his house, and all I remember is he came to the door. In fact, he got paranoid He had an emotional reaction to the stress. He got PTSD really bad immediately, and he had a reaction to it. Where by 3 days after the crash, he had a Thompson submachine gun sitting on a little table right behind his front door.
I remember you saying that, yeah.
Yeah. And I knocked on his door. When I come over to see how he's doing, I knocked on his door one day, and he came and, I heard about 3 locks unlock, and he opened it up, and I walked in, and he had that machine gun across the on the table, and I asked him what that was for, and he had some idea that the office was out to get him.
And again, medication maybe too, though, huh?
Could have been. It could have been the PTSD.
I was including that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly.
That kind of stress can create all kind. And yeah, so you added good call on the medication too. That could have added to it because he seemed very, just totally unreasonable. The office didn't have any desire to get him.
Right.
He thought they were mad at him because, they couldn't. Shane gone completely. Hart basically gone, and he can't come to work anytime soon. Buddy Colt gone. You crippled the heel side of the promotion.
Right.
And so he was convinced the office was mad at him, was going to get him somehow. That's what the gun was for. And how do you talk to someone who's thinking like that?
Right.
You can't tell them all day long that, well, I don't know what you could possibly be thinking about, Gary. I don't think that's the case, but when people want to believe what they think they believe, that's what they're going to do.
I wanted to go through some more of this with you,
okay.
Because the version you tell is nowhere near the version that Gary Hart tells. And so I'm not calling Gary Hart a liar, and I'm certainly not calling you a liar, Bob, because the way you tell this is very matter of fact, very, you seem to tell a total recall here, the situation, as anybody should be able to remember these things. I'm totally on board with what's going on here. You've talked about that wall, that
seawall,
the seawall. Sorry, I don't live on a coast. So you talked about the sea.
That's fine.
You talked about the seawall and them not being able to get it. And that's where, this is where now the little things, the injuries and stuff, no big deal. People remember things differently. Maybe you can embellish that a little bit when you're telling a good story. And I'm not making light of their injuries. This was very serious. Bobby Shane died in this crash. But I'm just saying some of the things that Gary Hart say here. Austin Idol even said, "Oh, I wasn't that messed up, darling. But, I did have this going on." But I want to go back to this just real quick, because this is where the big difference lays in this whole thing. And that's what I wanted to flush out. Is Gary Hart says that they, as you talked about them going towards the seawall, it was because they saw a light. So they kind of knew which way to swim, and they kind of swam their way over there. And this is where the story really differs, because Gary Hart says he pulled himself out of the water onto a dock. Maybe the dock you're referring to that's, 50 feet away, whatever you said it was. And he said that he saw a house, and he went to the house. And this is funny because you said he was in his suit jacket still. Gary Hart swears he was buck naked as he went to this person's house. And he banged on their door until they said they were going to call the cops. So he banged more because that's what he wanted him to do, was call the police. Then he went back and kind of slumped under a tree and just yelled to the other guys that help was on the way. And that's how he remembered it. But the next thing he says is the first person he sees after that is your girlfriend. So clearly, if you guys are there, maybe there's, a little more to this. But Austin Idol has even went back, and I don't know if he's just going along with Gary's story or whatever, but he too talks about Gary getting out of the water first. So, but you say, hey, we were there. And even Gary Hart puts your girlfriend there, which I guess would put you there. So it's just really weird that I get somebody trying to play the hero, or maybe they do remember things a little differently or whatever, but it's such a drastic difference. I pulled him out of the water versus Gary Hart pulled himself out of the water and then, basically saved the day. So that's where I wanted to get into that a little bit here. So I'm happy, that you broke it down the way you remembered it, the way, how it's probably the way it was. I'm going to have to say you helped Gary out. You talked about the injuries. Austin Idol, obviously, you said he helped himself out a little bit there because he wasn't injured in the upper body department. And then obviously Buddy Colt out, and he suffered his injuries as well. So I just wanted to touch on that. And then I have like 2 other things here I wanted to run by you and get your take.
Okay, let me rebut a little.
Yeah.
When Gary was, after he knocked on the door and got the cops on the way, and he slumped down under a bush or whatever, where were Colt and McCord?
I guess
still in the water?
they were resting at the dock, I guess, in the water. Yes, that's Gary's, because he couldn't pull them out or whatever. Or maybe he did pull them out and put them on the dock. I don't remember that part of the book, but I don't remember exactly what. I just remember him saying that he banged on the door. He was butt naked. They said they were calling the police, which is what he wanted. Then he went and slumped under a tree and he yelled he told the guys that, help was on the way. And that's the last thing he remembered until he saw your girlfriend.
Well, when Debbie, my girlfriend, came driving up, the reason she was driving so fast was because she had seen him at the dock. I mean, at the seawall.
Okay.
Not the dock, at the seawall, and couldn't get out. That's why she was in such a hurry. She was worried they were going to drown. That's why we tore back over there. And I never did see another adult there, like some of the homeowner or something. Mm-hmm. You would think that if the police did come, and I don't remember, I'm sure the ambulances came. I don't remember that part. Maybe once somebody got there, I just went ahead and left because there wasn't much I could do. I mean, Gary he wasn't, his head was busted open, and McCord had the toe. Buddy's ankle, there was no way his ankle wasn't like twisted sideways or anything. It wasn't dislocated, or, you couldn't tell how bad it was. The bad injury to his ankle was done by the doctor who tried to repair it. He cut it open, and Barry got a terrible infection and got gangrene. That's what happened to his ankle. It wasn't from the initial injury.
Right. I remember you talking about that last episode. Yeah.
And I don't want to, what I said earlier about Gary's frame of mind, about thinking that the office was out to get him and everything. Let's extrapolate on that about what the actual shock of you're sitting in a plane, getting ready to land. All of a sudden you go through the top of the plane, you're in the water, and you have, immediately save your own life, regardless of whether you're thinking about anybody else or not, and trying to get out of there. I'm sure they had to be thinking about sharks too. I mean, here it is night. You're splashing, you're bleeding, you're making all kinds of noise like a wounded fish. I'm sure that was all on his mind. And then once he saw that big shark, he let out a scream. I'm telling you, he screamed like a woman who, was being attacked or something.
Right. That's another funny thing, because he specifically says in his book that there's a lot of lore about sharks being in the water at that point in time, but he said there wasn't any sharks in the water at that time, which I kind of find hard to believe. There's just sharks in the water anyway out in that Tampa Bay area, at least back in those days, from things I've read and whatnot. But, I mean, the two things you don't do in the water, is bleed and flail your feet. That's going to attract the sharks for certain.
And especially both at the same time. Yeah.
Right. That's what I meant.
Yeah. Well, the report I got I talked to the air sea rescue people, and there were so many sharks around the plane, they couldn't go down to get Shane's body until daylight.
Wow.
So yeah, because it was it's one thing. I mean, sharks are tolerable if you can see them, and also they wanted to let any lingering trace of the blood in the water to get out of there, where the sharks would not have anything to. Because my understanding was Shane wasn't bleeding. But, why don't we go with, it's his story, he can tell it any way he wants to, and that goes for me too. I do remember it that way, and I mean, I do remember pulling all three of those guys out of the water. And because I was shocked at when I first saw Gary, his head, I could see his head was cut up. I said a few minutes ago about going to see Gary at his apartment. Mm-hmm. Well, he came to the door and answered the door. He's got a busted knee, a hip, and back, and all that. And again, perhaps some of these injuries came on later. I don't want to diss Gary because like I said before, I respected him. I liked him.
You've done nothing but put Gary over here as far as being good for the business, and you kind of hung out with him a little bit here and there outside of the business as well. Nothing crazy, but you said you would go over to his apartment or whatnot, which is not something you did with too many of the guys. So
no.
Yeah, so you've done nothing but say good things about Gary Hart, and it's not like Gary Hart says anything negative about you in the story. It's just, well, you're kind of omitted, although your girlfriend was there, right? So that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But you got to figure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Gary's a good guy, and again, he can tell a story any way he wants to.
Let's talk about the injuries real quick here, and then we'll go and we'll discuss anything else you want to about this or anything else here before we close up the show, but I just wanted to re-verify to everybody everything that happened here in this plane crash. Now, obviously, the obvious one is Bobby Shane passes away. Story goes, again, at least according to Gary Hart's book, because he felt terrible about the whole thing himself as well, that some of the boys or whomever, maybe Eddie Graham, I'm not sure who it was, they actually went and got a coroner report to show to Gary Hart so we'd stop feeling terrible that, there was nothing else that they could do to help. According to him, there was very little actual water in the lungs of Bobby Shane, that it was like blunt force trauma almost when they crashed into the water. He was basically dead on arrival, so he didn't really drown, like consciously drown. At least that's what Gary printed in his book. But we do know one thing. Bobby Shane's, sadly passed away in this situation. We know Buddy Colt never was able to wrestle. Well, he tried to wrestle a couple times after this, but he was never the same again, to say the least. His ankle, all sorts of issues. You say, it was from the surgery. The doctor screwed it up even worse than it actually was. Perhaps it could have been, repaired properly, but it was done incorrectly. And like you said last week, hopefully Buddy got some money out of that. Obviously, Austin Idol, he was down for a while now. You talked about, having the bottom of his toe and things ripped up. Gary Hart went a little further, said both of his feet, the bottoms were ripped off. Austin said, no, it wasn't that bad, but, he did lose, basically, like you said, quite a bit. And you think about, well, toe's not that big, but it was a big giant hole in the bottom of his foot, guys. And, but also Austin did suffer some ankle injuries, verified, and it kept him out of action for like 6 months. And he came back and he tried to work a little bit, and he was, he missed a lot of the next year, but it wasn't too long after that he developed the Austin Idol persona. So it kind of worked out for him in the long run. And then of course, there's Gary Hart. He, never walked the same again. I'll say that much. He talks about having, I don't know about a broken back, but certainly some injuries to the back area. But obviously the main thing was, all the lacerations, he claims, when he could feel his skull or whatever, how he was busted wide open. It's possible. Certainly crashing a plane upside down into an ocean, that'll do it to you. Those are basically the injury situations. You talked about Buddy Colt's ankle, check. Bobby Shane, we know, passed away, check. Gary Hart, you say, you can't really see the other injury, so, well, you don't know, but obviously he was lacerated, check. And then I just wanted to verify also, you talked about Austin Idol having the foot ripped, but also, he suffered some serious ankle injuries, I guess, in that crash as well. But that was because of trying to get out of there, getting his legs smashed underneath some debris, I guess. But that's where we're at, guys. And you've heard the story for many years. Gary Hart saved the day, and Austin Idol's told his version of the story as well, which is not really anything crazy. Now we get Bob Roop's version, who was there. I mean, it's basically verified in Gary's book without actually saying your name, everything but saying your name. So, Bob, you were there in some way, shape, or form, no doubt.
Well, I've got a question. Whoever's telling, now think about all the different versions. Wrestlers love to tell stories. Now, you just talked a while ago about Flair giving a blow-by-blow description of me and Slater, and he wasn't within 50 miles of the place, And so wrestlers do that. So the amount of things that got told about that plane crash, I'm sure every wrestler on the card wanted to have some kind of story about it.
I've even read Gordon Soley's version of this. So there's quite a few different stories out there, right?
Right. So who knows who is correct or not? All I can talk about is what I saw and what I remember. Mm-hmm. And, I've been examining my own memory here and thinking, well, is there any way you could have embellished that? It's not a glorious story. But there's a guy dead in part of the story. I'm not real thrilled about that. They have to even talk about that. I couldn't even, go out there and try to see if the guy was still alive. I'm not real proud of that. But there's some holes and stuff. If this homeowner, you'd think by the time that the cops got there that he would be out there to see what was going on. And I don't remember ever seeing anybody from those homes. Yeah, but again, any story worth telling is worth embellishing. And by the way that they've been, including with me, I guess. Again, it's like I'm not the hero of the story at all, of my story. I was glad to be able to help. Maybe if I hadn't, maybe Murdoch would have been there to do it. Maybe they wouldn't have been attacked by a shark.
Gary does mention Dick Murdoch showing up, but I guess it was after the fact. Dickie got there after the ambulances got there, because I guess Murdoch arrived, according to Hart anyway, as the ambulance was getting ready to put Gary on there, and Murdoch actually went to the hospital with Gary from there. So Murdoch a little late getting there, but yeah, he was around there as well at the time.
Well, he would have had to walk over there because when my girlfriend came up and yelled, "Get in," I got in.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Go back over there the way I came. There's guys in the water." Yeah, I don't think I was still there when Murdoch got there. I don't remember much after the ambulance people getting there.
Yeah. I get that. But yeah, I just, the details here, you're shining a spotlight in the water. It seems like it's, actual fact here. So I'm not questioning you at all, Bob. I buy your story more than the other one, and I'm not trying to knock anybody either. I wasn't there. I have no idea. I can only, listen to, the versions of the stories that are out there and go with what I believe. Yours seems very plausible. So I'll leave it at that. Some of these other ones sound like a movie. But
well, again, it's not, oh, look at me. Because, again, we're talking about somebody dying that I couldn't even go out and try to help. I was sorry as hell it happened. It was a tragedy for, not just for Shane, but those other guys too. Of course, much worse for him, but for Bobby. But so, again, what really happened down to the absolute details from the time that Buddy Colt went to turn around to bring the plane back around. Again, I heard it just fell out of the sky. Gary Hart went through the top of the plane because he had unfastened his seatbelt.
Okay.
Also heard that Bobby Shane, and I got this from one of the rescue guys, and again, this might have been third hand, where it was BS, but that Bobby was found, he had his hands under his seatbelt, like trying to get it loose.
Oh.
Now, it could have been he was trying to get it loose when the plane hit, and when he was knocked out, there was never any talk about massive head injury on him or anything. It could have been, but again, what actually happened in finite detail, I don't think we got to that tonight.
But I'd expect to get, the entire story here, but I certainly think you opened up a whole new can of worms for people to kind of process and let the listeners decide, what they want to believe. But when we talked about this originally off air, you were not trying to play the hero when you were talking to me about it. It was kind of a somber situation. You were just like, yeah man, I was there and I had to try to help him pull out. And I was like, what? In my mind, I didn't say this to you at the time, but I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Cause that is not what is in Gary Hart's book. I didn't say that to you, but that's what I was thinking. So it was like a whole new, wow, we gotta get this on air. Cause I wanted to hear your version of what went down because it sounded so real as opposed to some of the other stuff that's out there. So, no, I appreciate you, offering to talk about it here because, that's a situation that maybe not everybody wants to revisit. No matter what side of it that they're on, it's kind of hard to process. Even if you weren't one of the guys in the water, just being a part of that that can kind of screw up your psyche from any end. So,
yeah. And, it adds something else too. It doesn't happen a lot, but, the wrestling business has its dangers to it, and there's been a bunch of guys killed on the road in car wrecks.
Mm-hmm. And,
and here's one from a plane crash. So, and there was another plane crash that paralyzed Johnny Valentine.
Right.
And, so there's dangers. There were dangers in pro wrestling. I guess there maybe isn't in any profession, but I don't know if you're working, in an office, as an accountant or something. I don't know if you have the same kind of dangers that you'd have to do when you're out in the public, you're out on the road all the time, or you're traveling all the time. I talked about being in Japan and being on a bus, a train, a plane, and a boat, and multiple buses,
right,
all in the same day. Well, your chances of some kind of accident
they're certainly higher.
Yeah, they kind of multiply, don't they?
You got to hide that from your life insurance. I'll tell you that much anyway. Oh man. No, really, honestly, at the end of the day, I want people to make up their own minds and believe what they want to believe out of all of this. But I wanted to put that out there. That version, as far as I know, unless you've told it somewhere else, is not out there. So I'm just happy we were able to do that because now it opens people up to a whole new, world of things to process and think about in this situation. So I just thought it was a great idea to just, like I said, get it out there. So we have Gary Hart's version. There's other versions as well. And now there's the Bob Roop version. And you obviously were there. So I just appreciate you wanting to talk about it here.
Well, thanks. I mean, I'm glad to set, I don't want to say set the record straight. I wouldn't. I mean, I got enough stories about things that happened. I don't need to make up any.
Right.
My
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stuff I'm talking about, I mean, this stuff happened. And I never did psychedelics like LSD or anything. So the magic mushrooms is as far as I got. And those weren't,
Thank you, Chris Colt.
yeah, good old Chris. Oh, that's another thing. I've been reading, I was telling you earlier in private, I've been reading the book about Don Fargo called The Hard Way.
Yeah.
Great book, folks. Crowbar Press again. You can order a great book about Don Fargo, a really, really crazy guy. That's
putting it mildly.
I
don't know if they invented a word that describes Don Fargo, to be honest with you.
One of the things I read, Ray, was that he and Chris Colt were partners for a while.
Yeah, they were a tag team. Yeah.
They were a tag team. Wow. Well,
I think I said that in passing on the episode.
Oh, I think you did. Yeah, that's
so,
right.
Can you imagine them two as a tag team? I knew of their past together. That's why I was trying to just envision a night out with Don Fargo and Chris Colt. My God, holy cow, that had to be something. I don't know that you could put two more crazier guys together. Oh.
There's one fact there, and I don't know if he did it for his whole career, but there were times for years in his career, that the whole time they were on the road, he and Jackie Fargo, for example, were both naked. I'm talking bare naked.
Right.
While they were driving down the road. I mean, I read that, I went, what? And I thought, how could you possibly get away with that? Then I thought, wait a minute. Even back then, I'm sure they had some drive-throughs. Because, I mean, how do you go out? What, do you get out and go into a 7-Eleven? Bare-ass naked? I don't think you do it more than once.
I don't know. They don't make them like that no more, though, Bob.
But if you think back in those days, you could get a gas. There were gas station attendants.
Right. They came and pumped the gas for you.
They come and pump the gas, so you didn't have to get out of the car. But I know they always had a case of beer, at least a case of beer in the car, and they might have brought food. I don't know if they ate that much food, but if they did, they probably had some with them. But oh my God, what a story! I'm talking,
Yeah, it's a great book. I read that when it first came out, so it's been a long time. I probably need to go back and read that again.
Oh, I'm telling you, it was so far removed from my own, the kind of life I led. I could just imagine trying to do like 1/10 of the stuff he did.
Yeah.
And have anybody from my family, my father, my mother, or anybody with, hey, yeah, we picked up your son. He was driving by a church naked. He said he was on his way to a wrestling show. Will you come bail him out? My dad would have said no. I don't have a son named Robert Roop. No. But it's good stuff. I mean, no harm was done. Don went to jail. I mean, on a regular basis.
Imagine that.
Isn't that hard to believe?
Yeah.
He was having to be bailed out on just a regular basis. So yeah, but what a character,
Right.
So you had your basically boring old stuff like me, and then you had guys like Don who made the business a lot more interesting.
To say the least.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, we got a couple of really big time stories out here this week. That Dick Slater story's been around forever, and it's told many different ways by many different people. But I've also heard the version where you've said today that's really not too far fetched. And then of course the plane crash, one of the two big plane crashes of the 1970s. You talked about the other one too with Johnny Valentine, Ric Flair and company. Yeah, that's going to do it here this week, Bob. Unless you got anything else you want to add, man. We really covered some big stuff here on this episode.
No, I'm all set, Ray. I just want to thank you again for your research. You set me up for these. You prepare me and set me up very well, leading into these questions for me to answer. If in case my memory needs to be stroked, you certainly do it, and you open the door for a lot of things. And I really appreciate that.
Well, you want to tell things completely, and that, that's kind of my job. Yep. I'm not just a host of a show. I'm not just a producer here, guys. I'm not just editing, and talking with Bob. I try to do as much research as I can about everything. So that way, if we go sideways, if it's like, well, wait a minute, this can't be this way, maybe we can discuss it, and you're like, oh yeah, you're right because of this. So
of course,
that's the entire idea here, is to tell everything completely and accurately. And I'm sure people are going, well, is this really accurate? Well, that's the way Bob remembers it, and I'm not saying that in a negative way at all. You can only remember what you can remember, but honestly, man, I am blown away with some of the things you say. I fact check as I go back through and I edit. And I'm like, wow, that had to be. Those were the 3 guys that were there at that point in time in the territory. So, I mean, your memories are amazing as they are. So I certainly trust the things that are coming out of your mouth. I'll leave it there.
Well, I want to just add, like, for example, when your research pointed out that Alexei Smirnov, Michel Dubois, was probably the source of the ukulele angle rather than me, although I've implemented it. He was one that probably came up with it. I had forgotten. If I ever knew that, I'd forgotten it. I did know it, I guess, but I'd forgotten it because 40 years or whatever gone by. So I mean, I appreciate that because I don't want to. Wait a minute, I'm trying to pare it down. Give me a break here. But no, I want it to be accurate, because if it isn't, a person can never tell a lie in their entire life until, say, the last day of their life, they tell a lie. And when they die, you know what they are? They're a liar.
Yeah.
They're a liar. So
now you don't know what to believe,
Yeah, well, you found out a lie, it puts doubt on everything they told you over 50 years or whatever. So, no, I don't want to have any inaccuracies here. I was going to say it earlier. Yeah, there are some things about selective memory. There's some things about what was from the horse's mouth or what was from the other end of the horse in terms of what you're reporting. And that's always a possibility. But I will tell everybody out there that what I'm telling with my stories is to the best of my knowledge and my belief. Because for that very same token, now, me being an Olympian, that's on record. There's no way to, me being a veteran, all these other things are on record. But as far as stories and things that I experienced and my reaction to them, those come from me personally. And if I come across in any way as being duplicitous or untruthful, then it puts a doubt on everything I say. Right. And I'm not going to do that. I'll go bend over backwards. And boy, if I'm wrong about something, and I can find out, anybody out there, if you hear something that you feel and I'm inaccurate, please write us.
Yeah, because let us know.
Yeah, let us know, because I want to address it. I want to know what the facts are too. Right. Sometimes inaccuracy might come just from lack of knowledge. You don't know all the details. Right. So there was an important part that if you knew 2 more details, you would have known, but you don't. So we're doing the best we can. A lot of stuff about Don Fargo, you don't need to embellish anything about Don Fargo. No. So anyway, soapbox, I'll put the soapbox away, right?
You're fine. Obviously this show is about Bob Roop. It's in the title, but also in the title is the Wrestling Stoop, and that's really what this show is truly all about. It's just kind of sitting under the learning tree with you, Bob. And the stories here, a lot of firsthand, but also you just talk about things and why they may have been this way. And some of your other comrades throughout the times of professional wrestling, maybe you heard a third-hand story, but, it was so good you have to tell it here, like a Don Fargo story, which you can kind of believe. So, I mean, there's no really questioning things like that. But no, I've learned so much, so I'm sure so many other people out there have as well. And we're just getting started, man. We've got so much more to go. And I think next time, I've had a lot of people ask me over the last couple of weeks, are you getting back to telling the story in order? And I'm not saying people want us to just keep going down that road where we just telling your career in order and the people you came into contact with in order. But it's nice to every once in a while go back and keep telling that story from the beginning. We talked about 69. We talked about 1970, your first trip to Japan. Boy, that was a fun show. So maybe next time, and I'm not giving, don't hold me to this, guys, but maybe next time we'll kind of look at some of the stuff you did in 1971, just to, the really old school fans out there, keep them happy. And I'll try to come up with a couple of questions as well that maybe a little more modern. And I will put this out there, Bob. I want to let you know and let everybody out there know that there's a couple of people helping me out with some research. I'll throw his name next week here on the show because I want to talk about it a little more. But there are a couple people, one specifically, who actually used to take very detailed notes of everything that he watched on television back in your entire run throughout the Mid-South era. He actually started writing notes, every result, every angle, every turn, everything on every episode of Mid-South TV going back to the fall of 1980 and all the way through your entire run there, all the way through 81 and all the way through 82. So I basically have your entire career, at least the television version, plus all the show results that are out there of your entire run in the Mid-South wrestling territory, from your time entering as a babyface, your abrupt turn to heel, and man, he lays it out. He paints a picture. This guy that I'm talking, and I'm gonna put him over next week on the show, but he paints a picture of your heel turn that is just masterclass, the booking and the delivery. So I'm looking forward to getting to that. So maybe not too far down the road, we're going to break down your entire run in the Mid-South territory working for Bill Watts too.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'm going to have to make sure you get that information to me. I was just thinking about what you said earlier about looking back at things or going back. I thought that you're talking about 1971. I thought about going to that great website that has all the wrestling data and looking at my matches through 1971 and see if any of them stand out. I mean, it would be if something different
pops in my head. Oh, I remember that in Tampa. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that would be cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah,
sounds like a good time. All right, guys. So next time around, we'll head back to 1971. Maybe I'll pop a couple other questions on Bob throughout the show as well. So you guys got that to look forward to. But this week we're going to wrap things up. A couple of big stories out of the way now, Bob, as we continue on. All right, Bob, I just, want to tell you, I appreciate you as always. I'm glad we got these stories out there. These are some big stories, especially that plane crash, obviously a huge story in the world of professional wrestling. Someone, lost their life in that. Unfortunately, it was Bobby Shane, who at the time was one of the top heels in the entire business. So it's kind of unfortunate. It's not kind of unfortunate. It's very unfortunate that the entire situation happened. But it was good that you were there. It was good that, that the other three were thankful that, they made it out of there okay. And they went on to live, lives long after that. Gary Hart passed away, sadly, kind of young, I thought.
Yeah, he was.
Austin Idol's still out there. Buddy Colt, he did some things afterwards, I do believe, outside of the wrestling business as well. So he lived a pretty good life, I think. Unfortunately, it was just a situation that, like you said, man, when you're on the plane all the time or in the car all the time, it's, more liable to happen, especially when you have, somebody that maybe isn't fully licensed as a pilot in there, but we won't get into that, Bob. But I just wanted to tell you, I really appreciate, getting that story out there. I really do.
Well, I do too, Ray. And I thank you for framing the show in such a way that we could do that in what I feel is like a very intelligible manner. So thanks, my friend.
All right, that'll do it, guys. We're going to wrap it up here. So I want to thank you, Bob, for joining the show. Of course, it's your show, so why wouldn't you? But we will be back again next week, guys, for another edition of the Wrestling Stoop. Thank you once again, Bob.
All right, Ray. Thank you, my friend.
And all right, guys, as we finish up here this week, going to be back next week, going to talk a little bit more about Bob's early career in the Florida territory. Head back to 1971. Take a look at some of the wrestlers, some of the stars that were there during that time period. No doubt Bob's going to have some fun stories to share. But for now, we're going to wrap things up here. Reminder that you guys can find Bob, follow Bob, friend Bob, over at facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. No doubt he's looking forward to hearing from you. And of course, you guys can follow me, Ray Russell, on X, formerly Twitter, and Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And hey, guys, don't forget to try patreon.com/WrestleCopia and that $5 all access tier filled with gifts. We certainly appreciate your time here listening to the program each and every week. Going to be back again next week, dropping every Wednesday here. Another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.